is another episode of Reclaim Today. It's been a minute, as they say, and we're back. Today, it's myself, Jim Groom, and Lauren Hanks.
Yeah,
right?
technically, I think for me, I'm showing up on your right side, but yeah, we're back to Reclaim Today and also back
From
traveling.
OER23, which is
Yeah.
what this is about. We're here to do just some quick thoughts and reflections, highlights of OER23. We have a history of doing this. We've been to several OER conferences and we've reflected on what they were like, how good they were or not. And usually we don't have to say they weren't good. And this is yet another instance of saying, wow, what an amazing conference with amazing people. We won't be able to cover everything and everyone in this reflection, but I think it's worth starting out just kind of setting the stage. We went to Inverness, Scotland. The conference had a pre-conference day, which was April 4th. It was Tuesday. And then 2 official days of the conference, April 5th and 6th, a Wednesday and a Thursday. And we showed up on Monday and we did the entire conference through. And I really, really enjoyed it. But I'll let you start and talk a little bit about some of the event and what you liked.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like as it kind of goes with conferences, but it was definitely true this past week. I feel like there were things that I missed, that was the feeling. It's, I was so locked in for both days, but I kept going back to the schedule and realizing, oh gosh, I wish I could have seen that session too, and so seeing other reflections and some of the blog posts that have come out and even the conversations on different social channels, and realizing that there was so much that I didn't get to see too, and that makes me jealous. So I think that in and of itself is a sign of a good event. And to kind of be integrated with Discord and then to have the in-person elements. And I really enjoyed that first day, feeling a little more casual and kind of, having this informal feel, where everybody can just kind of get together. There's more workshops and just different conversations, and it sort of sets the tone for the next couple of days. And I thought that was just a really elegant entry into the conference. And I loved Brian Mather's workshop on, I think it was called A Bluffer's Guide to Visual Thinking. I have his zine and my notes and everything from that session, but that for me really set the tone for the conference as well, where throughout that session, he was basically coaching us into thinking about different ways of taking notes and wondering and noticing what was happening around us, and just how to think about visual note taking and the value of that, and just sort of gave us a peek into how he thinks about the world and kind of how he runs his business through that. So that for me was really special, and I think just led me to think about this conference a bit differently, just from the start. So that was really exciting.
I agree with that. I mean, I'll echo everything. I even have a copy of the zine here, and then I have a copy of his other 2 zines about Ireland, which are super. I mean, Brian Mathers, we've said it before, we'll say it again. He's amazing. He's a genius. He's so fun to work with. But he's also so good at what he does.
Yes.
And he kind of makes it look easy, and it's not. And I love that workshop because he put everyone in the situation of taking visual notes and cues and listening. And we all did, and we all talked and hung out. And it was, I agree with you. It was a great entry point to it. And immediately, like, we're first workshop in, and we already have an idea of how we're going to market our WordPress multi-region stuff using Brian Mather's art, which is no surprise, but this time also using a zine for when we go to WordPress Campus. So like immediately that connection was a payoff for thinking about how we're going to do what it is we do at Reclaim well, which is try and communicate what we do and how we do it. And Brian has been crucial for that. So great to hang out with Brian.
Yeah, great to hang out with Brian overall. I think I posted a picture on my blog of us having dinner with Brian and kind of the little Pizza Hut which, no pun intended. But anyway, go to the blog for that. But I did think that workshop and that day for me just sort of reinforced the importance of visuals when you're
Yeah.
talking about the work that we're doing. And I think that was it's a subtle lesson, but it's an important one to remember. And I think it's really easy, especially for me, to kind of feel locked into my computer and lists and all business. And so just to have that chance to think creatively in a different way, the change of scenery, it was really inspiring for so many reasons. But then I felt like that theme of having important visuals throughout, was a nice pattern to see throughout the conference too. And that I think we were reminded of again when we then presented a few days later and thinking, okay, we've got to talk about containerization, and just realizing again, like that shipping containers metaphor that we go back to. Like I have so many cool ideas now for how, we need to be talking about the cloud. We've wanted for so long to bring Reclaim Cloud and that artwork and that branding really into the fold of Reclaim Hosting and making it one. And I feel that inspiration, tenfold. And I want to pursue that stuff because I think it's valuable and I think it's helpful.
I agree. And, this conference is the closest I've come in many a year to feeling like part of a bigger, like what we do is part of a bigger thing. And there's other people. And I think movements like that, and Brian Lamb might laugh at me and say, is it a movement? But like the idea that you have a visual aesthetic to it matters. And Brian Mather's aesthetic is everywhere. It's not just Reclaim, it's GoGN, it's t-shirts, like everybody, even Eamon Costello had done work with Brian about some of his projects, and he's at the University College of Dublin, I believe, and city of, I think it's called something like that. I'm probably messing it up. I'm not very good with my UK and Irish college names, but the bigger idea is like Brian Mathers in some way has become like a visual representative of a moment in open education, and that's kind of cool because like you could feel it in this conference. There was something in the air in this conference, and it was electric. And everyone was either really happy to be back in person or just really happy to kind of get out of their hovel and see a different part of the world, which Inverness played a huge role in how amazing this conference was. Like there was something electric from the moment we stepped on that campus to the moment we left it on Thursday.
And I was going to say exactly that. I think so much about these events and conferences in general is where they're hosted, and the venue really does matter. If you have 50 people show up and you have a space that can support up to 200, the event's going to feel empty and echoey. You want it to feel big enough to support folks so they're not crammed together, but you also want to make it feel full and energetic. And I thought that the campus space and just the classrooms that we were in, there was enough movement where you could kind of go and separate if you needed to. There was a lot of space for side conversations, which we've already argued in previous episodes that is, half the value of conferences is what happens unplanned, and so I thought the venue setting was spectacular. And Inverness, like you said, was a real blast as well.
It's a good segue too, because one of the things so to your point, we would go out into these breakout rooms, like workshop was in this and several of the things happening the day before. But then day one, first keynote happens in this kind of like little amphitheater space that holds about 120 people, 130 people, which is what we had at the conference. It was not a gigantic conference. And it fills up, and you're sitting there and they're doing announcements. And Lauren, you got up and announced Reclaim. Like you're one of the first people everyone officially heard, which I loved. But like you could feel it. Like the room felt good. It felt warm. It felt cozy. People were there to support and hang out. And then I'm not going to pronounce the name right, but Rike Norfolk, she does this amazing talk about hope punk, hyper hybrids, kind of advanced Dungeons and Dragons, chimerical monsters. Like,
Yeah.
it was a really evocative, provocative talk about, like, what do we talk about when we talk about open ed or OER, and what is the future of that, and some really wild concepts that I didn't know if they would float, but it kind of has sustained a whole conversation after the conference. In particular, Sheila McNeil talking about the idea of, hope punk and speculative futures on her blog post. Like, it was a talk that really resonated with this community.
Yeah, I think yes, for all of that, what you were saying about the venue and the space for those keynotes, but then also that first keynote on hyper hybrid thinking, even, I thought it was so perfect and timely after the last few years that we had, where suddenly everybody's throwing out this word hybrid. Like, what is, yeah, we're going hybrid, we're doing virtual and everything's high. And one of the notes that I took from that keynote, and I have this in my post as well: when something is normalized, it is no longer hybrid, it is just that thing. And that was, I don't know, just a random moment that she said, but that has stuck with me too, because I think even through her presentation where she's morphing animals together and stuff, it's just, she kind of flipped this idea of what hybrid is on its head. And I appreciated that too. And just to remember that, to kind of, again, get us thinking more creatively about what that means and what that means for the future.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to do Rike credit and show her full name. And she's at our house, and I'm the Danish is not my high, it's not a high point for me. But she said, "Say my name like you're depressed." Rike. Like, she was funny actually, and she was quite cool. And she was there with her mom, and there was also that. Like, it was just really cool. And her mom was like a huge fan of the community too. And it was just really great. It was a great way to kick off the conference. And I really enjoyed that talk, and just how it was like, literally, like, what would an atmosphere for OERs look like? They gave the Ganges River personhood. What if we gave OERs personhood? Like, just weird stuff that you're like, what if?
No, I mean, there were so many good moments of that conference though. And maybe it was kind of feeling inspired from Brian's workshop and how I wanted to take notes, but I realized that instead of just trying to scribble the whole time, I would just kind of keep an ear open for things that stuck out and then write down those little moments. And so, I just kind of filled my notes with, just gold nuggets, things that have resonated with me. So, shortly after that, I wrote, everyone uses QR codes now. Like, I noticed that, it's like on all the presentations, nobody was leaving links or anything for come find me here. It was like just big QR codes. And I thought that was an interesting change since the last conference that I've been to. So I noticed things like that too. And then I also found myself just thinking of how these conversations and the challenges that were raised apply to my daily work and thinking about Reclaim more broadly. So I really enjoyed, I think Tanya Elias is how you pronounce her.
That's right.
Her last name. But she had an amazing presentation just talking about different models of growth and scale. And she kind of introduced the production model versus the model for growth. And just that got me thinking a lot about Reclaim even, and how Reclaim is scaling. So I just feel like so much of the conversation that was there, I was just happy to be a part of and observe it. But then also I feel so many ties to my own work as well.
I agree. And it's like funny. Sometimes also you say, Kate Bowles and I in Galway were having a conversation with Kate Malloy, who's at Galway, the University of
Yeah.
Galway. And it's funny, she brought up that conversation to start her presentation. And then in her presentation, she went on to very matter-of-factly, pragmatically talk about how using hypothesis and H5P basically took most of the content that was stuck in the LMS and opened it up for the campus and got wide adoption for both these tools in a matter of a couple of years. And to me, that's always my favorite kind of ed tech, is pragmatic, on the ground, one person who sees an avenue and goes after it. And it's not always the case you're going to get, people are going to take you up, but it's possible. And she did. And it was just a cool story of like doing the work, getting in there and doing the work. And I just really loved Kate Malloy's like take on a very pragmatic couple of open tools. They work well. They can change the way you work. And despite all the obstacles she was up against too, she had tremendous success in uptake. It was amazing.
Yeah. And I think, because this was such an important moment coming out of the last few years, I think you're right. There were so many people over the last few years that were up against quite a few obstacles and had to just buckle down and do the work to make things happen, right? Because this is what we've got, and we just need to make it work, right? And so a lot of this conference felt like people sort of resurfacing and saying, here's where I've been, here's what has come out of the last few years. I'm excited to hopefully continue that into Reclaim Open as well, because I think there's more to talk about. And I would love to, again, it's just brought me to a place where I want to do more interviews. I want to hear those stories and try to capture them. And I think a lot of that came out, in different ways throughout this conference too.
I agree. And, it was a conference of, one of the things I liked about it was a conference of very practical, on the ground ed tech, like Kate Malloy's, which was, I loved. And then very speculative, like Riquet's talk to start. And then, a mix of both, theoretical, like Tanya Elias talked about, what is OER and how does open scale? And it was kind of a theoretical talk, but super fascinating. But it was preceded by a talk, or was it followed by? I think it was preceded by a talk that was very boots on the ground, building OER at the level of the state. Millions of dollars to support that in Colorado, which was another interesting thing. I know folks who'd worked on that earlier, like Jonathan Poritz and Jonathan Reese, and to see that kind of flourish the way it had and become a statewide OER movement, and both of whom were really, Haley, and I'm forgetting the other presenter's name, were really articulate about what that program was and how they built it. It was a great pairing of conversations.
Chelsea and Jamie, I think, for the folks in Colorado. And that was really incredible. Again, one of the things that I liked about this conference is that there was no singular right approach to various challenges, and so I liked kind of that juxtaposition that I found myself in throughout the conference, where you had folks like Chelsea and Jamie who were like, defining OER and having definitions helps us because it provides those parameters so we can go after what we need. And we can say, no, that's not what we're doing here. This is what we're doing, right? Whereas, other folks throughout the conference were like, definitions of OER put us in a box.
Exactly.
And we need that freedom to build and transform as the tools change and as the needs change. And so even just to see, okay, we're all out for the same goal, but we have to address it differently depending on the audience that we're working with, or, who we're advocating for. I thought that was like a really interesting sort of in between the lines thing that I was experiencing as well.
Yeah. And I like that too, because, again, back to the opening keynote, which was about speculative AD&D monsters and hybrids, and then go to the final keynote of day one, or basically I'm calling it day one. I think of it as day two, because the first is a pre-conference, then the full official day ends with a great presentation about basically a distributed program offered through the University of the Highlands for a music department
Mm.
where no one has to be in person. It's completely distributed. And part of the logic behind that is to allow people who want to get a degree and who want to kind of continue to cultivate the local music tradition that they come from, which is very rich in the islands around Scotland and Ireland and in general in other places. Um, it talked about how, distributed learning can help that, and how these amazing artists and this amazing tradition is being sustained by a program at the university that was doing fully online before pandemic times. And when pandemic times came, they were in the catbird seat to just do it and do it really well. It was a great talk. The woman's last name was Stevenson, and I don't know if I have the first name, but if you have that, I can look it up, obviously. But her talk was amazing. It came after the Gasta, so there was so much energy. So it was a super hard to follow it, and she did.
Anna Wendy Stevenson.
Yeah, she was awesome. I thought that talk was such a good counterbalance to Riquet's, and kind of was, for me, symbolic of the way this conference could hold both the theoretical and practical closely, and not exclude one for the other, and give something to everybody and say, not only can you dream, but you can also do on the ground amazing stuff like she was doing with that music program. It was amazing.
I completely agree. You mentioned the Gastas, and I want to go back to that because they deserve their own conversation just about that point of the conference. But going to the keynotes as well, you mentioned kind of how Anna's talk, was really sort of pushing on the hybrid and immersive learning. And that reminded me of the session that we saw. I think it was right after yours on Web 2.0 versus Web 3. It was someone,
Hydra.
I think his name was Deem Whitcomb.
That's right.
He talked about Hydra immersive learning in sort of these capsules that allowed healthcare workers and the police force to practice in settings, and do these full day exercises or full weeks, exercises. And then they've pulled that into virtual spaces too. It was so fascinating. And just to see how people are learning on the web, I loved that idea.
It was super fascinating too, because that Hydra model was developed by someone, and they worked for the UK, and it was not for profit. So you could use this software and technology and not pay anything for it, as long as you were training civil servants like police officers or health workers, and that kind of developed there. But it was basically like you had this crazy control center in your university with rooms where you could basically produce an experience. It was like a virtual reality escape room. It was how cool would it be to be working on a team where you were creating these crazy reenactments? And some of them obviously are serious, like hostage situations for police officers, but or serious nursing, or medical center. But it was just a really cool use of tech that, is so outside of the scope of what we dream of in the everyday. It was super cool.
And to show how he was doing it in a very open sense, where all of the curriculum building was all just available. If you've got the tools and the resources to have this on your campus, you've got the curriculum as well, which I think was just brilliant.
I agree.
Before we move on from the keynotes too, I did want to mention Dave's keynote, which, if you want to talk about pragmatic ways of approaching the work that we do, and just, I thought he did such a wonderful job of, talking about this idea of navigating in a world of abundance. And how do we make choices and teach those values when we're trying to sift through what's right and wrong, or correct or incorrect on the web. And he was another one where I took I just felt like detailed notes throughout his keynote, because there was just so much to take in. So I'm not sure if you felt similar.
I do. I mean, I listened to Martin and Marin talk a little bit about their reflections. And I think one of the things Marin said that really resonated with me after the fact, thinking about Dave's keynote. I loved it. I thought he had some really great like one-liners, like the chat GPT is the auto tuning of knowledge. And, you know, he had, and his exercise in the middle of a keynote, which is super hard to do, where I give you like 2 seconds to build a paper airplane, followed the traditional model. And he did it really well. Like he executed a lot of, and very, like, it seemed like he wasn't even like working, right? But he was very smooth in that. But she noticed that like he wasn't trying to be defensive about providing, a safe haven for the old ways of doing things versus what's coming, right? Like he was both open to change and to what's coming, but also trying to think about what's already happened. And there was just a sense where it wasn't a defensive attack of a presentation. It was kind of open. And I think that was actually a consistent. And when Marin said that, I was like, you know what? That really resonates me in general about this conference. Like, you don't hear a lot of overreactions. You don't hear a lot of people like digging in or get off of my chat GPT grass. I mean, it was joked around with, but it wasn't really the focus. And it wasn't like, I even had a conversation in one of the after parties with someone from Israel who was really into chat GPT. And he actually made me start thinking about, why am I so defensive about it? And I think a good conference asks you to ask yourselves some of your assumptions. And I got that here. Like, I even come out saying, I got to like dig in and see what this thing is and why I feel, even though I haven't played with it at all, right, I am just by definition, like defensive about it and hate it. Like, that's a problem. That's a me problem as much as it might be a tech problem.
But yeah, no, I think kind of going back to Dave's keynote and the things that he was talking about, how do we find right answers in the time of abundance? Like, number one was demonstrate our humility, right? And our space to change and listen and to be open-minded. And I thought that, yeah, just as a general rule of thumb, that's how I felt everyone was acting at the conference, just very welcoming and kind of coming at it with this approach of, I'm here to talk about the things that have worked for me, and maybe you might find something useful here, but I'm also open-minded to what others are doing as well. And it was just a really healthy space.
Exactly. It's well said. You always felt in somewhat, apart from, the British critics coming out at the end of Dave's talk, because that's inevitable. Like when you do a keynote, it was really good. Like, and I just thought he was so also just dealt with all of that so kind of smoothly and elegantly. And it never did get to a point where it was uncomfortable, or it was just really good dialogue, criticism, discussion, which you kind of want,
And then there was the energetic element to the conference, right? Just kind of going back to that crackling energy, the fire that was there, and just sort of this happiness that I think everybody was ready to be feeling. And that definitely was reinforced, I think, with the Gastas, which that was my first experience meeting Tom.
Tom Farrelly is a character. Farrelly, I don't know how to pronounce
I think. And just, so if you've never participated in a Gasta or seen one, from what I understand, they are just 5 minutes to the T, 5 minutes only presentations, and the audience engages with the speaker to some degree and sort of sending them off and introducing them, but then also letting them know when their time has ended. And Tom Farrelly is sort of the facilitator throughout. So he's leading the audience through these waves of motion to get the audience involved and sort of kicking off the speakers. And then the lineup was incredible. Jim, how'd you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I had never done a Gasta. That was my first one. And I have to say, not only was everybody amazing who did it, but like, I think Tom's energy really like set the stage. Like, you do these calisthenics. He teaches you how to count to 5 in Irish or Gaelic. And then he describes Gasta means speed or quick-witted in Irish. And like, you really got this sense that like like he was building up a crescendo. People would come in, he would like joke with them. Like he was a masterful MC. Like I was just blown away taking notes, watching him go. Like I was like, and that kind of felt like everybody, to your point, was really in a groove and wanted to be there. And I mean that with the audience, like
Yes.
doing one and looking back at everybody, and I'm really in the moment, and everybody was like, and it was just awesome. Like I don't have another word for it. I've never had an experience like that of just being in a room that was so in it with you.
And I think that's exactly what you can't replicate in a virtual setting, unfortunately. Like, we can use these tools to our advantage and we can make these hybrid events, and we've worked through that. We've had really good virtual workshops, and I think we have found a rhythm. And I wrote about this in my blog post too, just being able to feed off the energy in the room is electric, and if Tom had stood up and said, all right, everyone, we're going to do a set of 5-minute presentations. Here's the way that it's going to go. Lou, you're first. The countdown's on. It's like,
We've seen that before.
Yeah, it's just, but he came in sort of guns blazing, loud, everything. And the audience picks up on that and feeds off the speaker. And so then I think, who was the first person that?
Eamon Costello. He's also the one who wrote that great Alt-C criticism post of the conference, which is really cool. But
yeah, his was fantastic. He's talking at the top, like his voice is echoing throughout and just really set the tone. And I think then all of the speakers that came after just fed off that too. And so by the end, everybody was just in this really elevated space together. It was
crazy. Yeah, that I had never been in a room where this kind of built up to this crescendo.
It was a crescendo.
And then that's what Anna Wendy Stevenson had to follow. And I was like, I really feel for her right now. She's walking into a room that is like on fire, and she starts off somewhat like, quietly, and she was there. She's like, Jesus, what am I getting into? But by the end of the talk, she had also owned the room and was like, everyone was like, what you're doing is phenomenal. And then on top of that, we follow her to the after party, which is kind of like a drinks reception. And her and her students are playing music that's from the islands. And it's amazing. She is, I think she's playing the fiddle and I think it's, again, it's a fiddle violin like instrument, and she's killing it, and her students are killing it. And it's like, this is amazing. It was just great.
No, when you see reception written on the schedule, I'm like, okay, is this what kind of reception are we talking? But I think it was the perfect event for the evening. Everyone who was at the conference just sort of walked across campus together, had a drink, a snack, listened to the music. And again, it just felt sort of very fluid, a great extension of the day. And then that, of course, led into other events happening in Inverness, which was also really wonderful. So yeah, I guess just going back to, the venue itself, but also the flow of an event can be really challenging to get right. And it's hard to predict when you're not sure how the audience is going to react, even just wearing like a conference host hat for a second. When you are getting your keynotes together and your presentations, you accept them with this idea of where you think they will go. But of course, in many instances, you don't really have that insight into what they're going to actually be talking about for an hour and what the tone will be. So to have such flow throughout an event without having that predictability for each session, it's hard to get right. And I thought this conference did a phenomenal job with that. So that was just day one, right?
That was just day one. Yeah. And then day one, they had another thing worth mentioning is So you would be at the campus, which was like 10 minutes away from downtown
Yeah.
Inverness, but then everyone pretty much stayed in downtown Inverness, and the hotels were all connected to these amazing breweries slash pubs, and the pubs themselves were just on fire. There was a great pizza pub that we all went to and ate, and then after that, there was a karaoke pub which had real karaoke, and Tom again got up and did a great AC/DC, and like people were hanging out, and like it was a lot of fun. Like there was a real that pub culture and that sense of openness. And I told the story before my talk, but it was great because we were in this pub, you know, and we were doing karaoke, and Tom had done it, and I was ready to do it. And then this whole like 50, like 20-year-olds came in, and I was like, oh no, the whole room has changed. It's all these young kids. They're not going to want to see old people karaoke. People karaoke. These kids were going crazy. They were like, yeah, it was amazing. And so I was like, the energy is contagious all over Inverness. It's not just a conference. It was the Inverness was such a character in this whole conference environment. And it's like picking the right place, picking the right context. Like it all came together. They hit something special in these 2 days.
Yeah.
And that was, like you said, that was just day one.
Yeah, I guess it's a good sign when you showed up on the morning of day 2 and your voice was hoarse from how much singing you had done the night before.
And I didn't drink or anything, and I felt like I had a hangover because I was just like in it. And that's why I was like, I don't know. Like I haven't felt this way for a long time. Like, and it's a balance, but it was fun.
And I will say sometimes, events like this can feel a bit draining where you get to the end of the day and you're like, wow, I just need to pass out because I've got to do this all again tomorrow. Right.
Yeah.
And there was kind of that interesting conversation happening on the side where people were just realizing, wow, I haven't been around this many people for this long in a long time. And that's new. And I've got to relearn how to do that a little bit. But I do feel like I was coming away from each day energized as opposed to drained. And that's, I think, again, it's not something that you can predict or make an intentional thing in your event, but the fact that that was the end result was just a wonderful sign. And so I felt that going into day 2, just like, wow, okay, if day 2 is half as good as day 1, we're fine, It's great. And that was what we presented too. So
yeah, it was good, right? Like and I felt like, it's going to be a day, and you knew what came the day before. So everybody's in it together. You knew this wasn't going to be a hostile environment. So things kind of just mellowed out and you could enjoy it. And I have to say, one of the things I really enjoyed is just catching up with people on the side, like Anne Marie Scott, who had come back from Canada. And this was her first event back in the UK. And Nicole Allen, who helps run the Open Ed conference and is kind of on the steering committee there, came to talk with Marin about some of the stuff they're doing with hybrid. And it was cool just to see like people recognize this conference for what it is. It's a great little gritty, community-driven open conference that's worth everything it has, and it gives you it's affordable, that people are open, and it's a really great experience. And these are the gems that Alt has done a really good job of preserving and keeping on the map since 2015. So major kudos to them. I thought it was great.
Completely agree. Absolutely.
But we didn't even get to day 2 and our amazing talks.
Yeah, that was inspiring for a whole other reason, right? Just because, day 1, I felt like I could lock in more as a participant. I wasn't presenting, so I didn't have anything to prepare. So I was really just there along for the ride. Day 2, it has a different kind of weight, I think, because, we've got something that we've got to produce at the end of this day. But even that had value for other reasons, because I think for the 2 of us, at least, it got us thinking, getting in that rhythm again of presenting, which we haven't done in person for quite a while. And then also to be able to come to the table and talk about, this moment for Reclaim, where here's where, on the cusp of a 10-year anniversary, here's where we started. Here's where we are, and the things that we're still holding on to very firm, our morals and what got us started in Domain of One's Own, and all of that's here to stay. But we're also doing really exciting stuff and to be able to talk about that both at the individual level and also at sort of this mission critical institutional level. I really think there's something there. And this conference provided an avenue to think through that a little bit more. And again, has me in a place where, kind of like the Reclaim Cloud visuals, I think there's so much that we can package up and talk about eloquently. And
Yeah.
we're in that moment now. So that's exciting for me.
I think I agree. And I think this is the first time I feel like, you know, Reclaim has really presented cogently about the cloud. Like, we've had it for almost 3 years. It has been something we've been learning and understanding and growing up with, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think we're at a point where we're doing it and we're doing it well. And we have the visuals and the metaphors and we're balancing the tech. There's always going to be some tech in it. We're always going to alienate maybe a few people in the room. But I think we're trying to get at the bigger drivers that are happening and what that means. And I think that presentation we did was a really great intro to us being comfortable talking about it to various crowds and understanding the room and where we start and stop and build and slow down. It was a good experience. It was like the first time I felt like I really could talk about containers and talk about Reclaim Cloud without feeling like I had lost the room because I hadn't really prepared accordingly.
Right. And there was a period of time many years ago at this point where I think we were doing that with Domain of One Zone, is, hearing from an audience and understanding where folks are getting stuck along the way with concepts. And I think the value of Reclaim, there's a lot that we bring to the table, but one of those elements is, being able to translate complex ideas in a way that makes sense for someone in the classroom, and to take that scary factor away and just to replace it with possibility. I love that Reclaim can do that no matter what we're talking about. And so, but it takes practice and it takes listening to a community and understanding where are your concerns, where are your questions, and then being able to frame a conversation around that. And sort of, you can only do that when you're able to really see that energy and, the deer in the headlight looks, right? And so to now be in a position where we've been practicing with Reclaim Cloud for a couple of years, which is crazy, by the way, to now say, okay, we're sort of narrowing in on how to make this a successful conversation. And I think the approach at one point was, look at all the possibility of the cloud, which is not gone. It's still there, but it's almost so much possibility that it's paralyzing, or because you're not sure where to start. So instead, to say, okay, let's focus on the applications. You want to run something cool, we can do that there, and then we'll expand as you need more things. And
the parallels with cPanel and like giving people the kind of parallels so they understand it. And that goes back to that metaphor idea, like the metaphor of Docker, the metaphor of the container ship, the metaphor of the visual, to understand the shift in the technical, which is often invisible.
Right. So it's just, again, the same way that I think we talk about Domain of One Zone and WordPress multi-site running in parallel to each other. They're not competing against each other. Yeah. They work well together. Or, you might see value in one and not the other, and that's okay too, but they're not competing, and that's important to know. And I think the same is true for cPanel versus the cloud. It's like there is a time and a place for cPanel, for running WordPress in cPanel, but there's also a time and a place for running WordPress in the cloud, or running something like Jupyter Notebooks in the cloud, and there's real value in both spaces. So putting Reclaim in this position where we can help folks make decisions based on what they need. It's what we've always done. We're just, adding more to the plate to say yes more. And so I love that. I loved being able to talk about it at OER23. And I think each time we do it, we get a little better, just that much more better. So that's exciting.
I agree. And I think another thing, just in general about OER23 as we wrap up, is like, it's nice because we're going there literally as vendors. Like, I mean, we can't deny that, but I think I appreciate Maren saying we think of Reclaim more as a partner, but I also think like it doesn't ring false. Like, I think we went there, we're part of that community. I think we've done the work, and it's just cool to be there as a presenter and feel like you understand the principles, you understand the conference and the people, and what, it's not a bad thing to have people who have focused in on hosting some of these technologies and some of these things you want on your side. And I
Right.
feel like we like play a role there, and it's a
Well,
role I'm happy about and proud of.
absolutely. I think my primary goal when I go to conferences like this, obviously I think everybody kind of goes with the idea of getting something out of it, right? But really,
Yeah,
I go in to listen, right? And I think the vendor role goes in to talk, and
yeah,
that's
that's
the
right.
difference, right? Is my goal is to hear from a community, to listen to what's going on, to hear where the work is happening, where the questions are, where the challenges are, and then figure out how Reclaim can help. Like, and so I've always loved that Reclaim doesn't have to, you know, be that typical vendor. By being a vendor, I feel like we're supporting a conference, but we're not trying to sell something. And
We didn't even
so,
bring any swag, which was an over.
no, we
I
should have brought
overlooked
some
that.
stickers or something. But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway, I I know we're probably coming to a close here, but yeah, it was a great conference. I'm feeling inspired. I feel
Me
like I
too.
need to blog more. And it's also gotten me really stoked, I think, for Reclaim Open coming in
Yeah.
June, and even more events down the road. So
A lot to think about based on this for Reclaim Open. And
yeah.
I just hope, like, we can do everything we can with do planning, and we have a history of that, and I think we'll hit that. But like, I hope there's that same energy of people ready and willing to come back together
Mhm.
and do that. And that carried the conference. Like, everybody came, and I'm sure everybody had, like you said, there was that sense of, I'm not ready for this, or I don't know if I can do this. It's been a while, and it turned out to be not like an onus, but in fact, for me, it was like a joy to
Yeah.
finally be amongst these people talking about things that I really love to talk about.
Exactly. And I think my goal for Reclaim Open, regardless of how large it is I want it to feel intimate. I want it to feel celebratory, and just to be able to capture a moment in time. And I think
Yeah,
if we can check those boxes and to make everyone feel welcome and comfortable to talk about what they're doing and to engage in discussions around that, it will be a success in my
I
eyes.
agree.
So,
That's a great way to look at it. Well, OER23, thanks for
yeah.
all the memories.
It was great, and we'll see you next year.
Absolutely. Yeah. See you next year.